Okay. This is quite the setup. So I'm in a soundproof box off a room where I think you can see one camera where our participants are listening. So if a riot breaks out in the other room, I think I'll be able to tell. Thank you all for joining us at the very first virtual component of the Mural UDG. And I am very, 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 very happy to have my friend Jon Beasley-Murray here. So I spoke a little bit this morning about Jon. I really just gave a very brief description of some of the work he's done. But I think it's better to hear it from the man himself. So Jon, I'm going to invite you to just say hello and maybe talk a little bit about, well, before we get into your work with Wikipedia, what you do at UBC, your research interests, y si te es confortable en español, creo que los amigos aquí son buenos con esto. Hola, Jon.
Hi, hola, buenas tardes a todos. So my name's Jon Beasley-Murray. As Brian has mentioned, I teach here at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. My research and teaching are mainly on Latin America, Latin American literature, history, culture, and political theory. And I guess in my teaching, I've done various things that have involved, I don't know, opening things up in one way or another. I've used blogs. I've used YouTube. I've used a whole bunch of things. But I guess what you want to hear about today is about Wikipedia. And so I've done various different kind of projects with Wikipedia, both the English Wikipedia and the Spanish Wikipedia. Some have worked better than others. But it's been a learning experience for me, at least, and I think for the students every which way.
So Jon, this morning, ooh, feedback.
You're very loud.
Either that or Brian Eno's in the room. Jon, I said this morning that when I first talked to you about Wikipedia, you were very, very skeptical about it. If I recall correctly, you once told me that you even told your students at one time they shouldn't even look at Wikipedia. And if I recall correctly, you went from that stance to being so enthusiastic on Wikipedia that I think it got flagged. Could you maybe tell a bit of that story, how you went from so skeptical to so immersed?
I think I still am skeptical. I think I'm probably just as skeptical as I was before. But the question is how you deal with Wikipedia and how you relate to it and how you encourage your students to deal with or relate to it. I guess the first observation is that students are going to be using it anyway. I mean, we all use Wikipedia. I mean, no one's a pure here, as it were, right? And why shouldn't we, right? Wikipedia is an extraordinary resource. But that's not to say it doesn't have problems. It doesn't have a whole series of problems which we could talk about at more length. The problem is, I think, that students are not well prepared to understand how to work with and despite those problems. In other words, in part, just how to evaluate an article. I guess the first thing to say, one thing to say is a problem of Wikipedia is it's very uneven. There are some great articles on Wikipedia, and there are some awful articles on Wikipedia. There are some articles which are great because they really offer an overview of a particular topic, and there are some articles which are awful, and not necessarily for the reasons that are immediately obvious, but because, for instance, they offer only one particular slant on a topic. Because they are, I guess, biased or weighted in a particular way. There are articles which are the subject of long-running edit wars and which change very often and are quite unstable. And you don't get to see that. I guess my sort of philosophy or emerging philosophy as I started to work with Wikipedia was that in order to understand how Wikipedia works and how you get what you get on Wikipedia, the best way is to become to take part, to be an active participant in it. So that's the I mean, one of the goals of using Wikipedia in education or with the students, getting students to contribute to Wikipedia, which is essentially what I do, is that then they see how the sausage is made, right? Then they understand how how they get what they're reading, and then they become much more, I don't know, discerning, critical in the sense of they're able to establish what is good, what is useful, how to read Wikipedia. And this is something that we don't really teach in education, partly because we prefer to ignore Wikipedia. We prefer to say we prefer either to outright ban it, or just to pretend it doesn't exist. And so by getting students to interact with, to write Wikipedia, to understand how it's made, they get to be much better consumers, much more knowledgeable, critical, thoughtful, and to some extent skeptical readers of the encyclopedia, while also being able to get what they want from it, which is, you know, information about such a wide range of things that you get on the encyclopedia.
So if you're getting the students to author on Wikipedia, and you were just highlighting some of the ways that it's become an increasingly contentious space. So you were talking about, you know, very dedicated attempts to influence Wikipedia in ways that aren't entirely transparent. When you have the students authoring, do they run up against those kind of efforts directly, or is that something you have to talk about outside of the activity itself?
They don't. I mean, so there are some areas of Wikipedia, like there are some areas of life, right? And public discourse, Wikipedia is a part of public discourse, which are particularly contentious, right? So I don't know, politics, international disputes. So when I first started editing on Wikipedia, for instance, I noticed a sort of long-running, often slow-motion edit war between the Brazilians and the Mexicans about things such as essentially which is the regional power in Latin America. And, you know, every so often a Brazilian would come along and change the article on Latin America and put Brazil near the top and put photos of Brasilia and Rio de Janeiro near the top of the article. And then, you know, a few weeks or a few months later, someone from Mexico would come and switch everything around and make Mexico seem much more important. The kinds of things that my students edit, the kinds of articles that my students edit aren't the ones that generally draw much attention. They tend to edit. I ask them to edit things which are to do with what we're learning, what I'm teaching them in class, which tends to be Latin American literature, and it tends to be. I mean, I don't know. They've done some fairly high-profile articles, like they thoroughly revised and rewrote the articles on Mario Vargas Llosa and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. But equally, I know one class we did a whole series of articles on women authors in Latin America. Now, this is not an area in which there's a great deal of contention or edit warring, as they say on Wikipedia, that people are immediately coming to put a different point of view on. But that doesn't mean, and this is one of the, I think, interesting things about the working with the encyclopedia, that doesn't mean that they don't get any pushback at all. It'll just be of a different sort. It's not necessarily sort of ideologically or politically slanted. They might get other editors saying, well, on what basis are you claiming this about whatever it is, La Fiesta del Chivo, or Yo Supremo, or these other articles on Latin American novels that we're editing. You need to show your sources. This reads too much like an essay. This is too much of your own opinion, for instance, right? You're just writing an essay. You're not writing an encyclopedia article. Or other editors might come in and ask things like, or deal with the style that they're using, right? They're not following Wikipedia style, for instance. So they do interact with other editors, and again, I think this is. I don't see this as a problem. I see this as a feature rather than a bug. Let's put it that way, right? As a bonus, because it shows them how. Taking them out of the sort of enclosed space or the ghetto of the university classroom it is teaching them how knowledge is produced in the public sphere. And to some extent, there's no better example of that than Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia has taken on that mantle of producing or reproducing certain forms of knowledge, at least, a sort of quasi-academic knowledge in the public sphere. And to say that, no, this is this kind of knowledge is often produced as a result of debate and lack of accord, and that you have to negotiate and deal with other voices, right? In other words, I guess to put this, I know that one of the themes that you're looking at this week, I suppose, is open, what it means to do open education. Open education can't be just sort of sending out, I don't know, students and educators like missionaries, to the world around. It also has to mean being open to get feedback and criticism of different sorts from readers, viewers on YouTube comments or whatever, and in the case of Wikipedia, other writers, other editors, and so on. And sometimes that's awkward. Sometimes that's difficult. I often use the example in the project which I think Brian has talked to you all about, the Murder, Madness, and Mayhem project. There was we created an article from scratch. Usually, we're editing articles which already exist. We created one from scratch. It was very early in the semester. It was a book that we were teaching. This is in a class on dictator novels, and the particular book was El Señor Presidente by the Guatemalan Miguel Ángel Asturias. The article didn't exist. And so I created it in class in front of everyone. And like 2 minutes later, some Wikipedia editor had come saying, this article should be deleted. This book does not deserve this book does not deserve its own article. So I had to sort of immediately in front of them say, look, okay, this is what happens. This is what happens. And provide more justification for why this book deserved its article. And then that went on to become our first feature article and something that we were all very proud of and everyone else was very proud of as well. But you have to justify yourself in ways that perhaps you don't have to do in the classroom, right? You're acknowledged in the classroom if you're the professor. You are the voice of authority. I guess, students may push back a little bit, but they're normally too cowed because they depend upon a grade, right? Whereas when you open in the classroom, you'll get comments and criticisms and pushback from people to whom you don't owe a grade or don't feel that with whom you don't have that kind of formal contract, I suppose. And again, I think that's a benefit, right? Even though it can be a little anxiety producing. Again, when I created this article, it was almost immediately about to be deleted. And this was very early on in using Wikipedia in the classroom. At first, it was like, oh my goodness, what? This is all going to go terribly. But it went fine.
Can I get you to say a bit more about that notion of negotiation with other voices and how students respond to that? Because I think students probably find it hard enough to write for a professor or their classmates. What can you describe what happens when suddenly people from out of nowhere come in and how students deal with it and then how you deal with it?
Yes, I think for students it can also produce anxieties. Perhaps I've been well, not just lucky. I don't think it's just luck, but my Wikipedia projects have tended to go pretty well in one way or another, with their problems sometimes and so on. But I have seen Wikipedia projects that have gone disastrously. And usually that when they go disastrously, usually it's because of some kind of negative interaction with other editors. And I think one of the reasons why my classes haven't gone disastrously is that I'm much more engaged. I think one thing that you can't do is just sort of set the students to go about it on their own and just sit back and wait until everything's done, as I suppose you often normally do with the other kinds of assignments. I find that you have to be involved and interact. And one of the things that you have to interact and help students is with this negotiation and with this dealing with other Wikipedians, other editors when they turn up, because sometimes those other editors are right and sometimes they're wrong, or rather, sometimes you think they're right and sometimes you think they're wrong. That's what the negotiation is about, and you try to explain what you're trying to do, what the class is trying to do. You help the students to explain that. You help your students to articulate the purpose of what they're doing. But again, all these sort of problems or potential problems, again, I see as feature rather than bug. I see it as an advantage. Students are, you know, I mean, when they normally do an assignment for you, they're doing it because they're told to, right? And that's it. It's part of the grade. Here, they've got to justify to a wider audience what the value of what they're doing is. And they have to think about themselves what the value of what they're doing is. Why are they doing this? What's the purpose of it? What is the purpose of writing an article on Wikipedia? And sometimes at the beginning of the class, they're uncertain. They're uncertain about that. They're like, why do people write on Wikipedia? I mean, they themselves, the students themselves, read it all the time, but they find it hard to get their heads around why they would exactly where it comes from. Oh, people must write this. Well, why on earth do people spend their time, mostly not as part of courses, you know, spend their free time as some kind of hobby, writing this? What is behind that? And you know, thinking through the motivations that other people might have to contribute to the encyclopedia is also, I think, another learning moment, right? A teaching moment, teachable moment, as it were. You know, how do such institutions, because Wikipedia is essentially an institution now, how does it come about? So, I mean, they have to think quite differently from the way in which they tend to think in class or in classes about what they're doing. That there is a rationale or a justification, or there should be some kind of rationale or justification. They're not simply jumping through hoops.
So since you brought it up, why do people author in Wikipedia? What is the motivation? And does exposure to that motivation rub off on the students?
Well, people let it on Wikipedia for many different reasons. People like to see the stuff that they write. They like to see, you know, lots of people, they've got a particular interest in something, and they want to share the wealth, as it were. You know, the same reason why people write blogs and on Twitter, and I don't know, those kinds of things. And I mean, that leads to some of the well, one aspect of the weakness of Wikipedia, which is that it is very uneven, right? Again, it's not just uneven in quality, or rather, this is another aspect of it being uneven in quality, but it tends to reflect the passions and the interests of the people who write it. Those people who write it, at least we're talking about the English Wikipedia here, but similar things which looked a little bit different happen in the Spanish Wikipedia and other Wikipedias. But the people who tend to write the English Wikipedia, they tend to be North American, they tend to be white, they tend to be middle class, they tend to be male, they tend to be between the ages of, I don't know, 15 and 25, let's say. So for instance, Wikipedia is very good on pop culture, for instance, very good on TV shows. You know, any TV show you're watching, and you know, you want to check out how many episodes it has, what happens in each episode. I mean, you almost find a very full account of almost any TV episode you can imagine. It's very good. Wikipedia is an excellent resource if this is your interest in pornography, detailing all the careers of various pornographic stars, for instance. But it's not so good it's not so good on Latin American literature, for instance. It is not so good when it comes to individuals, for instance, individual figures. It is much better at documenting and telling us about male scientists or sports people politicians and so on, and much less good at telling us about women, about female scientists, sports people, writers, and so on and so forth. In other words, it reflects the enthusiasms of its demographic. So one of the things that we're doing in a class, which is a little bit different, is, well, especially if it's a class in which they're learning about things that are not aligned with those passions of your common or garden Wikipedian, is that we're also kind of making up for some of that deficit. So, for instance, just to go back to that article, which was almost deleted from the start, I mean, it is an important book, the El Señor Presidente, by a Nobel Prize-winning Guatemalan novelist. Again, your average Wikipedian, the 15 to 20-year-old white middle-class male, isn't particularly interested in Nobel Prize-winning Guatemalan novelists. But in a little way, in our class, we were able to rectify some of that imbalance, and even more so in another class, which I briefly mentioned earlier, in which I did a class which was just about women writers. It was solely about women writers, and actually we talked about this discrepancy. We talked about why read women writers, why have a whole class on women writers, and we also talked about the ways in which information about women writers may not circulate in the same ways, and how Wikipedia itself, though it, as an encyclopedia, it sets out to be, it proclaims itself neutral, it doesn't have any particular point of view, it doesn't take any particular side, even when we're not talking about those kind of contentious areas like politics or international relations, can sort of reproduce what they call a systemic bias, right? By favoring certain types of subject, certain types of people to profile as opposed to others. So that, again, so the weaknesses of Wikipedia themselves become part of what we talk about in class. And I try not to make the whole class about Wikipedia. Wikipedia is kind of a tool. Wikipedia is an assignment. Is one of the things we happen to be doing in class. So, for instance, the class on the dictator novel was a class on a dictator novel. It wasn't a class on Wikipedia. It was a class, however, in which it featured Wikipedia. But at certain times, it becomes something. The issues raised by Wikipedia's unevenness, and it's even its faults, get raised in class in itself. So again, just sort of returning back to your first question of how did I become such an enthusiast? Again, it's not that I'm such an enthusiast, but this is a good setting within, and a good way in which to think in interesting ways, I think, critically and thoughtfully about what has become, part of our everyday lives, what has become, the sort of background, the wallpaper of our digital experience. You type something into Google, almost always the first hit is Wikipedia. Let's think about that. Let's think about the effects of that. Let's think about how those results, those search results, get made.
Okay, because we got a little of a late start, we're probably going to have to cut this off sooner than I would have liked. But before we wrap up, I was hoping I could just, since we have a bunch of newcomers here in the room, if people were to be beginning their journey, and keep in mind that most of them will likely be doing it with the Spanish language Wikipedia, what are some messages you might have for them as they begin to set out on this?
There's a certain amount of support you can get. There's a Wikipedia education program. It's worth getting in touch with those people. I'd say there's much. I've worked on the Spanish Wikipedia as well as the English Wikipedia. The Spanish Wikipedia, for better and worse, is much less trafficked, I suppose. So you're much less likely to get those kinds of encounters that I was talking about earlier, or they're much less frequent. And so they become a little bit of a surprise and perhaps a shock when they do arrive. I guess I'd say that the most important single thing, the two most important single things in any Wikipedia assignment and using Wikipedia in the classroom, again, one, the instructor should be involved. You can't just tell people to go off and come back at the end of the semester with a Wikipedia article written. So the instructors are involved. And the second thing is, I guess, the most important aspect for the students themselves is the choice of which articles they write. It is almost always the best idea for you to provide those articles rather than to ask them to come up with their own articles, because they will tend to choose as an article something which actually doesn't belong as an article, which is more like an essay, an argument, right? And an encyclopedia article is not a place for an argumentative essay. You know, why something should happen. I don't know why. I don't know. You know, why Donald Trump is wrong, or what people should do about the border wall, or why we should read a book in a particular way, or anything like that. So they should understand the genre of the encyclopedia, and that's helped immensely if you pick the articles for them already, rather than ask them to come up with their own. And now, some of the articles may be already in existence, and some of them may not be. So I guess students also need to understand the difference between, or the importance of rewriting and editing. I mean, it's not for nothing that the people who write on Wikipedia are actually not known as writers, they're known as editors. That what you're doing is very often working with text which already exists. Again, that's something that students aren't used to doing. So it's worth emphasizing and putting a lot of, I don't know, training them and getting them to think about what that means. To edit both other people's text, and then to a large extent also their own text. And one other thing about writing a Wikipedia article is it takes a lot of revision, a lot of repeated revision. It's something that they do throughout the semester. So those are three things I guess I'd emphasize. And now it's become three, okay? One, that the instructor, as an instructor, you should get an account, you should be involved. Two, that you should think very carefully about which articles you're asking the students to work on. And three, that you should deal with the difference between writing and editing.
Okay, thanks. Yep. This isn't a surround-proof box, I guess. I'm not sure if there are questions from the group. If people have questions, I think they could ask them in Spanish if they wish. I'm not sure if we'd be able to hear in here or not. I'm just looking to see if there's hand signals. Okay, so we're going to see if a microphone can pick up what the question is. If not, I'll relay it. You know what? I can't hear that clearly. I'm sorry. And it's not coming over the sound system. Another option is people can speak into Grant's iPad as well. Is there a question? Oh, it's coming on text. Hopefully, I will have a written question. This is how they did it in the 18th century. We have a carrier pigeon coming.
Okay. Hi there, John.
Hi.
The question was about, you know, at what point did Wikipedia change from being less reliable to something that people are using as a more reliable tool?
I don't think it has changed. I mean, it's got bigger, right? It's got bigger, and parts of it got better. But even as it gets bigger, there are many parts which aren't better. So I think, and people have been using it all the time. So I don't think that it's, you know, I'm not sure if it's improving, or what would it mean to improve. It's still growing. It is. Some articles get better. Some articles get worse. I mean, I think it's. I mean, again, that's something that really, in order to grapple with Wikipedia, understand how it works, and students get to understand how it works. It's such it's a process. It's so dynamic. The interesting thing about, of course, the wiki technology is you can go back and you can see the entire history. You can see how we got there in ways that you don't normally see. You can see how and when and even who, or rather which pseudonymous editor, I suppose, right, put a particular phrase or paragraph or text or constructed something. So yeah, I don't think it's got better, but I don't think it's got worse. And I think that understanding that it is, in some ways, it's not a thing; it's a process. It's again something that anyone reading Wikipedia needs to learn, and students learn it themselves by becoming part of that process, by sort of jumping in.
Okay, so I think we might try the same process again.
Okay.
So if I'll probably ask you to hold on for a minute, and then we'll relay a question to you. Okay. It's coming.
Hi there. What was the reaction of the students to the types of activities you were having them do?
I think it's fair to say it was mixed. I guess you should also ask about initial reaction and final reaction. I think, as I said before, like it was for some, at least initially, there's a certain amount of anxiety. I mean, again, it's about being open, right? I mean, being open means not for the instructor, but also for the students, being, inviting other people to respond, possibly in real time, right? But on the other hand, there's quite some excitement that the notion that what they were writing was going to be seen by potentially thousands or millions of people. In fact, one of the things I did quite early on in the first iteration of this, there's a tool where you can see how many people view any particular Wikipedia page per week or per month or per day, and so on. And so one day I came into class and I said, "Do you know how many people are reading this stuff?" And even in the smallest and most out of the way articles that we were doing, it was, I don't know, several thousand a month, let's say. And with some, so for instance, like your Mario Vargas Llosa, or your Garcia Marquez, or whatever, it was tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. And I also like to show the graph of what happened when Mario Vargas Llosa was named the Nobel Prize winner in whatever it was, 2010, I think it was. And there's this amazing spike in which hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people are visiting that page in one day, immediately the day after. They see it in the news. And I like to think that often they're also, the reporters and the journalists who've been sent off to write it. This guy, Mario Vargas Llosa has been given a prize. Go off and write an article about this. And the sense of pride that students have in thinking that their work, or what is in part or in large part their work, is being read and matters, right? Is something that I think they react very well to. But there are lots of missteps and ups and downs along the way. So, but it's the same thing. The thing that produces anxiety is also the thing that produces a pride and a sense of achievement. The fact that you're out in the open.
That sounds like a really good note to end on. Sorry, I'm getting my own feedback. I can't thank you enough, Jon. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and experience and wisdom with us, and great way to kick off the week. So thanks for rolling with the weird technology. I'll thank everyone in the room for that. And thank you, Jon Beasley-Murray.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.